I never thought a simple act of kindness could change my life. But that's exactly what happened one cold winter afternoon. Emily Jacobs, a woman of 68, sat alone on a frozen bench in the park, her thick scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, her breath visible in the chilly air. She wasn't a wealthy woman by any means. Her apartment was small, tucked away in a quiet corner of New York City, and she had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years ago. The emptiness of her life had become a familiar companion, one she had learned to bear silently. But as the wind howled through the bare trees, she couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that clung to her like the cold. She glanced around, watching people rush past her, their heads down against the wind, their eyes fixed on their destinations. No one noticed her sitting there. No one noticed the old woman struggling with the cold. But then, a man walked by, his face red from the cold, his steps slow and heavy as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He paused when he saw her, his eyes catching hers for a brief moment. Emily smiled at him politely, but he didn't smile back. Instead, he simply sat on the bench beside her, his body visibly shaking from the cold. Emily hesitated for a moment, but then she did something that surprised even herself. She took off her boots, the warm, soft leather that had been with her through many winters, and handed them to the man. "You look like you could use these more than I do," she said, her voice soft but steady. The man looked at her, confused at first, and then his expression softened. He hesitated but then nodded, accepting the boots. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled again, a simple, kind gesture that she didn't think much of. She hadn't expected anything in return, not even a thank you. She just wanted to help. The man put on the boots, his hands fumbling slightly as he struggled to tie them. Emily watched him for a moment, then turned her gaze back to the bustling park around her, trying to shake off the feeling of emptiness that still lingered. She didn't know it yet, but that small, selfless act was about to set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. The man stood up, gave her a nod, and walked away, his steps more confident now, his posture straighter. Emily didn't think much of it. After all, it was just a small act of kindness. But little did she know, the stranger she had helped was no ordinary man. In fact, he was one of the wealthiest men in the city, a billionaire with a reputation for helping others, though no one ever knew the full extent of his wealth. He had been watching Emily for a while, impressed not just by her kind gesture, but by the way she carried herself despite the hardships she faced. He had been walking by when he saw her offering the boots, and something inside him told him that she was different. He was used to people asking for things, used to people wanting something in return. But Emily didn't expect anything. That's what intrigued him. Later that evening, he reached out to his assistant, a young man named Kyle, and gave him a simple instruction. "Find out everything you can about the woman who gave me her boots today." A few days later, Kyle returned with a report on Emily, her modest apartment, her quiet life, and her deep sense of empathy. He learned that Emily had been struggling ever since her husband passed away. She had no children, no close family, and her life had become a series of lonely days, one after the other. The man, whose name was Richard Hawk, felt a strange connection to her. He had everything money could buy, but he had never known true warmth, true kindness, the kind of selflessness Emily showed that day. He decided then and there that he would repay her, but not in the way she might expect. He wasn't going to just give her money. He was going to change her life. Richard began by anonymously sending Emily a small package every week. A basket of fresh fruits, a handwritten note, a new pair of warm boots to replace the ones she had given away. Each week, the gifts grew more extravagant, but Emily never knew who they were from. She just thought someone, somewhere, was being kind. Richard's plan was simple, to help her without her ever knowing it was him. But soon he found himself wanting more than just to help her. He found himself drawn to her, her kindness, her strength in the face of adversity. He knew he couldn't just remain anonymous forever. Eventually, he would have to meet her in person. And when he did, he would make sure that Emily Jacobs, the woman who gave away her boots on a cold winter's day, would never feel alone again. Emily Jacobs sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills in front of her. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that filled the space. She had been living alone for 5 years now, ever since her husband, Tom, passed away. The world around her had changed, but she had remained largely the same. The same routine every day. She never expected things to get easier, but sometimes she wished they would. She ran her fingers over the old photograph of Tom, his face frozen in time, smiling back at her from the frame. He had been the love of her life, her rock. Without him, everything felt like it was slowly slipping away. She sighed, brushing away a tear that threatened to fall, and turned her attention back to the bills. The heating bill, the electricity bill, and the rent. Everything seemed to be piling up at once. She didn't want to admit it, but she was struggling. Even with the small pension she received, it didn't seem like enough anymore. She had always been careful with money, but now she found herself counting every penny, wondering how she would make it through the next month. Her thoughts drifted back to the park, to the man she had helped. His face had lingered in her mind ever since that day. What had he been doing there, all alone, shivering in the cold? It was as though he had just appeared out of nowhere, and the moment she had offered him her boots, he had left as suddenly as he had arrived. It wasn't unusual for her to help people. She had always believed in the simple kindness of helping others when you could. But something about him felt different, like he was more than just another person passing by. He had looked at her with such intensity, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to him. She was surprised when the first package arrived. A small, neatly wrapped box with no return address. Inside, she found a handwritten note and a new pair of boots. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to her. The boots were even warmer than the ones she had given away, and they fit perfectly. The note simply read, "For your kindness, may you never be cold again." Emily was puzzled, but also deeply touched. She hadn't expected anything in return, but here was this thoughtful gift from someone who clearly knew how to appreciate kindness. She couldn't help but feel a bit of warmth spread through her as she slipped on the new boots. Over the next few weeks, more packages arrived. Each one contained something small but meaningful: a basket of fresh fruit, a scarf made of soft wool, a cozy blanket to keep her warm on the cold nights, and always a note. For the woman who gave away her warmth, one note read. Emily was both humbled and confused. She had no idea who was sending her these gifts. She didn't think she had done anything to deserve them, but each time she received one, she couldn't help but feel a little less lonely. There was someone out there, someone who cared enough to notice her, to send her these thoughtful gestures. It was a comfort she hadn't expected but now couldn't seem to live without. One day, as Emily was returning from her weekly grocery run, she noticed something strange. There was a large, black car parked in front of her building. She had never seen it before, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. As she walked past the car, the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, and a sharp suit that seemed far too expensive for someone just passing by. The man looked at her for a moment, and she felt a strange shiver run down her spine. He smiled politely and approached her. "Mrs. Jacobs?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. "I'm Kyle, Mr. Hawk's assistant. He would like to speak with you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Hawk? She had heard that name before, but where? Before she could ask any questions, Kyle led her inside the building, and they made their way up to her apartment. Emily's mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening. What did this man want from her? When they reached her door, Kyle knocked, and the door opened slowly. Standing in the doorway was none other than the man from the park, the one she had given her boots to. He smiled warmly at her, his eyes twinkling with an expression she couldn't quite place. "Miss Jacobs," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "I'm Richard Hawk. I believe you've been kind enough to help me, and I wanted to return the favor." Emily stared at him in shock, her mind trying to process what was happening. Richard Hawk. The name clicked in her mind. He was one of the wealthiest men in New York, a billionaire with a reputation for being philanthropic, though few people knew the extent of his generosity. And here he was, standing in her doorway, offering her something she could never have imagined. "I'm here to offer you something," Richard continued, his gaze soft but earnest. "Something I think you deserve." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew this moment would change everything. Emily's mind raced as she stood there, the door still slightly ajar, staring at Richard Hawk, the billionaire who had just appeared in her apartment. She had only known him as the man she had helped on that cold winter day in the park, a stranger who had accepted her worn boots with a quiet gratitude. Now, he was standing before her, offering her something she couldn't even begin to comprehend. She had always believed that kindness was its own reward, that giving was the right thing to do, no matter the outcome. But this was more than she could have ever imagined. Richard smiled gently, sensing her confusion. "Please, may I come in?" he asked, his voice calm and warm. Emily nodded numbly, stepping aside to let him in. He walked past her and into her small apartment, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. It was the first time in years that she had felt such a presence in her home. She closed the door softly behind her, still unsure of what to say or how to react. "I'm not sure I understand," Emily said, her voice hesitant. "What is it you want from me?" Richard turned to face her, his expression soft but sincere. "Nothing, Miss Jacobs. I don't want anything from you. But I owe you something." He paused for a moment, as though carefully choosing his words. "You helped me when I had nothing. You offered me warmth, and I want to offer you something in return." Emily swallowed hard, her mind struggling to catch up with his words. She had always been a private person, never expecting anything in return for her small acts of kindness. And now, here was this man, offering her a life-changing opportunity. "I don't understand," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard smiled, a small glint of humor in his eyes. "Let me explain," he said. "I've been following your story, Ms. Jacobs. I've been watching your kindness, your resilience. And I want to help." Emily felt a wave of discomfort wash over her. She had never been one to accept help easily, especially from someone she barely knew. She had always believed in standing on her own 2 feet, no matter how difficult things became. "I don't need charity," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of pride. "I've managed fine on my own." Richard nodded, his expression understanding but firm. "I don't see this as charity, Ms. Jacobs. I see it as a chance to offer you something you've earned. A chance to live the life you deserve." Emily remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor as she processed his words. She had always believed that her life, her struggles, were just a part of who she was. She never imagined that someone like Richard Hawke would even notice her, let alone want to change her life. "I've been blessed with more wealth than I could ever need," Richard continued, his voice gentle. "But wealth isn't everything. It's the people we help, the lives we touch, that truly matter." Emily raised her eyes to meet his, and she saw something in his expression that made her pause. There was sincerity in his eyes, a genuine desire to help her without expecting anything in return. "What are you offering?" she asked cautiously. Richard smiled. "I want to offer you an opportunity, Miss Jacobs. A chance to leave this apartment behind, to move into a home that reflects your worth. I want to help you find peace, stability, and a life without the worry of bills and loneliness. I want to offer you the security you deserve after all these years of struggle." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined anything like this. She had never considered leaving her apartment, her home. It was all she had left of Tom. But as she listened to Richard's words, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of something better, something more than the quiet solitude she had become accustomed to. "I don't know," Emily said, shaking her head slowly. "I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." Richard took a step closer to her, his gaze steady. "You're not taking advantage of anything, Miss Jacobs. You're simply accepting a gift, one that is long overdue. You deserve this, and I want to help you." Emily felt her chest tighten as she considered his offer. It was overwhelming, yet somehow, it also felt right. She had spent so many years trying to do everything on her own, trying to carry the weight of the world without ever asking for help. But now, here was this man, offering her a chance at something she had never dared to dream of. "I need some time to think," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Richard nodded, his expression understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But know that the offer will remain open." With that, he turned to leave, but not before offering her a final smile. "Thank you, Ms. Jacobs, for everything." Emily watched him walk out of her apartment, the door closing softly behind him. She stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling, unsure of what to do next. But one thing was clear. Her life was about to change, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope that things could be different. Emily spent the next few days in a daze, her mind swirling with the offer Richard had made. She couldn't help but replay the conversation over and over, trying to understand why someone like him, someone so wealthy and powerful, would offer her something so life-changing. Her small apartment suddenly felt even smaller, the walls closing in on her as she sat by the window, staring out at the snow-covered streets below. It had been years since she allowed herself to dream of something more, and now, with Richard's offer lingering in her mind, she was faced with a decision that seemed both impossible and exhilarating. She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to make it through life without relying on anyone. But the idea of leaving this place, of finding a home where she wouldn't have to struggle every month, was tempting in a way she couldn't ignore. She tried to dismiss the thought, telling herself that she didn't need charity. But Richard's words kept echoing in her mind. "You deserve this." She knew he meant it. She had never been the kind of person to ask for help, and the thought of accepting it was difficult to swallow. But was it truly charity? Or was it just a chance to finally have the life she deserved? Emily had always been a quiet, humble woman, content with the small things in life. But as she sat there, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had been too proud for too long. The next morning, Emily made up her mind. She would meet with Richard again, but this time, she would ask the questions that had been haunting her since their first conversation. She needed to know more. She needed to understand why he wanted to help her and what he expected in return. Richard had told her to take all the time she needed, but she couldn't keep waiting. She had to know if this was a genuine offer or just some strange act of charity. As she walked into the small cafe where they had agreed to meet, Emily felt a sense of nervous anticipation she hadn't felt in years. She had put on her best coat, the one she saved for special occasions, and had taken extra care with her hair and makeup. She didn't know why, but she wanted to make a good impression. Richard was already there, seated at a corner table, his gaze scanning the room. When he saw her, his face lit up with a warm smile that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, that she was truly seen. "Ms. Jacobs," he greeted her, standing as she approached. "Please, have a seat." Emily sat down across from him, her hands nervously folding in her lap. She couldn't help but feel a bit out of place. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "I've been thinking a lot about your offer, and I have to ask, why me? Why are you helping me?" Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's a fair question," he said. "The truth is, when I saw you that day in the park, I was struck by your kindness. You gave something away, something precious to you, without expecting anything in return. That's rare, especially in a world where people are always looking for what they can get. You didn't ask for anything. You just gave." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't sure how to respond. She had never considered her actions as anything special. "I was just doing what felt right," she said quietly. "But why do you care?" Richard smiled again, but this time there was a sadness in his eyes. "Because I've been in a position where I've been surrounded by people who only care about what they can get from me," he explained. "I've spent my life building a business, accumulating wealth, but along the way, I've lost sight of what really matters. You reminded me of that. You reminded me that kindness, generosity, and simple human connection are the things that truly make life worth living." Emily listened in silence, her heart slowly beginning to open. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of inspiring someone like Richard. To her, she was just a woman doing what she could to get by. But here was this man, with more money than she could ever imagine, telling her that she had reminded him of what really mattered in life. "I don't want anything from you," Richard continued. "I just want to give you the chance to live a better life. A life where you don't have to worry about bills, where you can enjoy the things you've always wanted to do. You deserve that." Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. She had never allowed herself to dream of a life without constant worry. She had never believed she could have more. But Richard was offering her that chance. "I don't know if I can accept this," Emily said, her voice trembling. "It feels too much, too overwhelming." Richard nodded, his expression kind and patient. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "Take your time. But know that the offer is there. I just want you to have the life you deserve." Emily sat back in her chair, her mind swirling with everything Richard had said. She had never imagined this kind of life for herself. She had never thought she could have more than what she had. But now, with Richard's words echoing in her mind, she felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that something better might be possible. The following week, Emily sat in her apartment, a sense of calm washing over her as she gazed out the window. She had made her decision. She would accept Richard's offer. It felt like a leap, one that was both exhilarating and terrifying, but she knew that it was time. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was taking control of her own life again. Richard had given her a chance, not just for financial security, but for peace of mind, something she had not known in so long. The thought of leaving the apartment behind, of starting over, seemed like a distant dream, but it was one she had finally allowed herself to reach for. Emily had been reluctant to accept help for so long, believing that her independence was the one thing that defined her. But now, she realized that she had spent too much of her life carrying burdens alone, when there were people out there who wanted to share that load. She didn't have to face everything by herself anymore. As she prepared for her meeting with Richard, she couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude. He hadn't pushed her into anything. He had only offered. The decision to accept was hers alone, and that freedom was more valuable than anything money could buy. When she arrived at the meeting, Richard was already waiting for her in a small cafe in the city. He stood up as she entered, offering her a warm smile. "Ms. Jacobs," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I'm glad you could make it." Emily returned his smile, feeling a sense of ease that had been missing in her life for so long. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm ready to take the next step." Richard's eyes softened, and he nodded. "I'm glad to hear that." He motioned for her to sit, and they both settled into the cozy booth. "You won't regret this, I promise you," he said, his tone reassuring. "This is about more than just giving you a home. It's about giving you the freedom to live the life you deserve." Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously tapping on the table. I've never lived like this before. I've always been so careful, so cautious. This feels so overwhelming." Richard leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense but kind. "I understand," he said. "It's a big change, and it's okay to feel that way. But you've earned it, Emily. You've spent your life giving to others, helping where you could. Now it's time for you to have something for yourself. And I'll be here to help you every step of the way." Emily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was honesty. There was no ulterior motive in his eyes. He genuinely wanted to help her. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't known she needed. "I know this won't be easy," she said softly, "but I'm ready to try." Richard smiled, his eyes filled with approval. "That's all I ask," he replied. "You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time." They spent the next hour talking through the details of her new life, from finding her a new home to arranging the logistics of moving. Emily couldn't believe how smoothly everything was falling into place. Richard had made it clear that he wasn't going to just give her money and walk away. He was going to be there, offering his support and guidance as she transitioned into this new chapter. It was a far cry from the isolation and struggle she had grown accustomed to. As she left the cafe later that afternoon, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had made the choice to embrace change, to step into a future where she didn't have to face everything alone. And though the road ahead would still be uncertain, she knew that she wasn't walking it by herself anymore. The days that followed were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of change that Emily could hardly keep up with. Richard had arranged everything for her, from finding a new apartment to setting up a moving service. She was still processing it all, still adjusting to the idea that her life was no longer going to be the same. But as the day of her move drew closer, she felt a mix of emotions: excitement, fear, and even a sense of disbelief. She had spent so many years in her small apartment, clinging to the familiar, that the thought of leaving it behind felt surreal. But she knew it was time. Her new apartment was beautiful, a bright, airy space with large windows that looked out onto the city. It was everything she had ever wanted, and more. As she stood in the living room, looking around at the fresh coat of paint on the walls and the new furniture that had been carefully chosen for her, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. She had never imagined that her life could change so quickly, that someone like Richard would come into her world and offer her a new beginning. But here she was, in a new place, with a new future ahead of her. For the first time in a long time, She felt like she had a chance to live her life the way she had always wanted. The first few weeks in her new apartment were a blur. There was so much to do: unpacking, settling in, getting used to the new routines. But Emily was determined to make the most of it. She spent her days exploring the city, walking through the parks, visiting local shops, and meeting new people. She even joined a community center where she could meet others her age and stay active. It was a life she never thought she would have, and it felt good. She had never realized how much she had been missing by staying in the shadows of her old life. Slowly, she began to open up more, to embrace the new experiences that came her way. One afternoon, as she was walking through the neighborhood, she bumped into Richard again. He was standing outside a cafe, chatting with a group of people, but when he saw her, he excused himself and walked over to her with a smile. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his voice warm and kind. Emily smiled back, feeling a sense of comfort in his presence. "It's been a little overwhelming, but in a good way," she said. "I never realized how much I needed a change until now." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not easy, stepping into something new," he said. "But you're doing great. You deserve this, Emily. I'm glad you're finding your way." They chatted for a while longer, catching up on how she was adjusting to her new life. Emily felt a sense of peace, knowing that Richard had no expectations of her, that he was simply there to offer his support without asking for anything in return. It was a rare feeling, and it was something she appreciated more than she could express. As the weeks passed, Emily's life continued to evolve. She found herself becoming more involved in her new community, attending social events, and even volunteering at the local shelter. The more she gave, the more she received. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment that she had never known before. For the first time in years, she felt like she was living a life that was hers, a life that was full of possibility. One evening, as she sat in her new apartment, sipping tea and watching the sunset through the large windows, Emily reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the woman she had been, lonely, isolated, and unsure of herself. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, strong, confident, and open to the world around her. She had learned to accept help, to embrace change, and to believe in the possibility of a better future. And as she looked out over the city, she knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more ahead of her, and she was ready to face it, no matter what came next. Emily had come a long way since that cold winter day when she first met Richard. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments, but she had found her footing in this new life, one step at a time. She had learned to embrace the changes, to welcome the opportunities that had come her way. Her new apartment felt like home now, a place where she could truly relax, a place that wasn't just a shelter, but a reflection of the life she was now building. She spent her days exploring, meeting new people, and even taking up hobbies she had once put aside. Emily had started volunteering at a local community center, something that gave her a sense of purpose, of belonging. She was no longer the lonely woman she had been. She was becoming part of something greater, something that filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. But it wasn't just the community that had changed. Emily had changed, too. She no longer felt like a stranger in her own life. For years, she had quietly accepted the way things were, telling herself that it was enough. But now, she realized that she had been holding herself back, afraid to ask for more, afraid to want more. And yet, here she was, in a new chapter of her life, learning to open herself up to the world, to accept the good things that were coming her way. One afternoon, as Emily was leaving the community center, she bumped into Richard again. It had been a few weeks since their last meeting, and she had been meaning to reach out to him to thank him properly. But she hadn't quite found the right words, not yet. Seeing him now, standing on the sidewalk with a warm smile, felt like the perfect opportunity. "Emily." Richard greeted her with a smile that made her feel like she was truly seen. "How are you doing? How's everything going?" Emily smiled back, a bit shy but genuinely happy to see him. "It's been great, actually," she said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "I've been keeping busy, volunteering, meeting new people. It's been a real change, but in the best way possible." Richard nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he listened. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You deserve to be happy, Emily. I'm really proud of you." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never been one to seek validation, but somehow, hearing him say that made her feel like she was on the right path. Thank you, she said quietly, feeling a bit of emotion well up inside her. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. I'm not sure I would have been able to make this change without your support. Richard's smile softened, and he took a small step closer to her. You did all the work, Emily, he said. I just gave you a little push. The rest was all you. You've shown incredible strength in making this transition, and I'm proud of you for that. Emily felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with something else, something she hadn't expected. She realized then that she wasn't just grateful for the opportunity Richard had given her. She was grateful for him, not because of his wealth, but because of the way he had seen her, really seen her, when no one else had. He had given her a chance to believe in herself again, and that was worth more than anything. I've been thinking a lot, Emily continued, feeling a sense of clarity that surprised her. About what's next. I know this is just the beginning, but I don't want to waste any more time. I want to keep moving forward, keep making the most of this new life. Richard nodded, his eyes filled with respect and understanding. That's the spirit, he said. I know you will, Emily. I have no doubt about that. They stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the city, and Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't the same woman she had been when she first met Richard. She was stronger now, more sure of herself. And as she looked at him, she realized that her journey was far from over. There was so much more waiting for her, more opportunities, more experiences, and perhaps more moments of unexpected kindness. She smiled at Richard, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Thank you, she said again, her voice steady and sincere. For everything. Richard smiled back, a knowing look in his eyes. You've earned it, Emily. And remember, the world is full of possibilities. All you have to do is reach for them. As she walked away, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she truly believed that the best was yet to come. Emily walked through the bustling streets of New York City, the sounds of the city washing over her like a familiar rhythm. The weight of the past few months had settled into her bones, but this time, it wasn't a burden. It was a quiet confidence, a certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her life had changed so much in such a short time, and yet, she couldn't help but feel that the best was still ahead of her. She had found a new sense of freedom, one that she never thought possible. She had always believed that change was something to fear, but now she saw it for what it was, an opportunity to grow, to explore, and to discover parts of herself she had forgotten. As she walked, Emily thought about the people she had met in the last few weeks. The community center had become a second home to her, a place where she could connect with others, share stories, and feel like part of something bigger than herself. She had made friends, people who genuinely cared about her, and that meant more to her than she could put into words. But it wasn't just the new connections she had made that had changed her. It was the way she saw herself now. The woman who once felt invisible, lost in the shadows of her own life, was finally stepping into the light. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a woman with a purpose, a woman who had the power to create the life she wanted. As Emily turned the corner, she spotted Richard standing outside the community center, waiting for her. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes filled with warmth. Emily, he greeted her, his voice deep and steady. It's good to see you. How have you been? Emily returned his smile, a sense of gratitude swelling in her chest. I've been great, she said, her voice bright. Everything's falling into place. I'm so thankful for everything you've done. Richard nodded, his expression softening. I'm glad to hear that. You deserve all the good things coming your way, Emily. As they stood there talking, Emily realized how much Richard's support had meant to her. He had given her more than just material things. He had given her the belief in herself, the belief that she was worthy of a better life. And for that, she would always be grateful. I've been thinking, Emily said, her voice thoughtful. I know I've made so many changes already, but I feel like there's still so much more I can do. I want to keep growing, keep finding new ways to challenge myself. Richard's smile widened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of encouragement. I have no doubt that you will, he said. You've already come so far, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way. Emily felt a surge of emotion as she looked at him, realizing just how much he had impacted her life. He had been a catalyst for this transformation, but it was her strength, her determination, that had carried her through, and she was proud of that. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Richard's eyes softened, and he gave her a knowing smile. You've always had it in you, Emily, he said. You just needed someone to remind you of that. They stood there for a few more moments, the city's noise fading into the background as they shared a quiet understanding. Emily knew that the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she was ready. She had learned that change wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. And as she looked at Richard, she realized that the best part of this new chapter wasn't just the opportunities that had come her way. It was the person she had become along the way. She was no longer just Emily Jacobs, the woman who had spent years in the shadows. She was Emily Jacobs, a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. And that was only the beginning. Emily stood in front of her apartment window, gazing out at the skyline. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the city, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had come a long way since that cold winter day when Richard had first entered her life. She thought back to how different everything had been then, how uncertain she had been about what the future held, how she had never imagined that something so unexpected could change everything. But now, as she stood there, she knew that everything had shifted. Her life was no longer a series of lonely days and quiet nights. It was full of promise, full of possibility. She had built something new for herself, something she had never allowed herself to believe was possible. She had come to understand that the kindness she had shown that day to a stranger wasn't just about the boots. It was about the openness to change, to connect with others, and to accept help when it was offered. Richard had been that unexpected catalyst, but it was her own strength that had carried her through. She had made the choice to embrace the unknown, to step into a life that was hers to shape. And now, with every step she took, she was discovering more about herself. The past few months had been a whirlwind. She had moved into a new apartment, found a new sense of community, and built relationships that were meaningful and real. She had found purpose in volunteering, in meeting new people, and in giving back to others. And in the process, she had found herself. Emily smiled to herself, feeling a sense of pride in how far she had come. There were still challenges ahead, of course. Life wasn't perfect, and she knew there would be moments of doubt and uncertainty. But now, she felt more equipped to handle whatever came her way. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a support system, a new network of friends, and, most importantly, she had rediscovered her own inner strength. As she continued to look out at the city, she thought about Richard and the impact he had had on her life. She had never expected someone like him to enter her world, but she was grateful that he had. Not because of his wealth or status, but because of the way he had seen her, really seen her. He had helped her see the potential she had always carried inside her, but had never fully realized. And now, she was ready to take the next step in her journey, to keep growing, to keep discovering. Emily knew she had the power to shape her own future, and she was determined to make the most of it. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Emily's life continued to evolve. She didn't know exactly where it would take her, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She knew that every step she took brought her closer to the person she was meant to be. She had learned that kindness, both to others and to herself, was the key to unlocking the life she had always dreamed of. And as she turned away from the window, a sense of excitement filled her heart. The best was yet to come, and she was ready to embrace it all.